I have Tom Moser here today as my guest.
Pleasure to be on your podcast. I began my career at NASA in 1963 at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. While I was there, worked on everything from Project Mercury all the way to space station, and ended up my career at NASA as being the program director at the space station in Washington, D.C. So I guess the big part of my life there was in shuttle development. It began in 1969 and we launched in 1981. So I worked on that project from sketchpad to launch pad. And it's very interesting to go through every phase of a program from concept development to detailed development of all the systems on board. So that's probably the highlight of my career. As I left NASA, worked in the private sector for a while and retired back to Texas. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, retired to Texas in the Texas Hill Country, west of Austin, and worked for George W. Bush when he was the governor of the state of Texas, ran an economic development department for the state of Texas and created Texas Spaceports. It got the legislation passed, and that was quite an experience. But that's where Elon Musk is now going to launch some of his vehicles from one of those spaceports in very South Texas. So it's been a long career in the aerospace business and been very rewarding. Got to work with a lot of fantastically smart people, a lot of astronauts. And where I'm sitting right now, there's an astronaut that lives about 1.5 miles from me. So here we go.
So I was just at NASA Johnson, and you were the director of engineering there for a while.
I was.
Were you around when they were actually using small models of the space shuttle, putting that on top of another model and trying to see whether they could have it ride on top of a plane?
Absolutely. I was there. The guy that came up with that idea was a guy named John Kiker. He was a great engineer, but he always built model airplanes. And so he decided he thought that would be a good idea, but he wanted to demonstrate it. So he built the model that we used. It was, I don't remember what scale it was, probably a 1/100th scale, something of that sort, and probably, 4 or 5 feet long. Built the model of the 747 and the shuttle, put it on there and demonstrated you could fly away fly underneath, away from the shuttle and let it keep flying at work. The interesting thing about that, Tom, the shuttle was not a popular program in Congress. And with that, it was always on the threat of being canceled. Every year we had to replan our program because there was never sufficient funds to implement the program the way we hoped to. And it was not until we did an approach and landing test where the orbiter came off the back of the 747, the public and the Congress saw it and said, wow. So anytime, there's a program like that, I think NASA has learned, and probably any large program, you got to have a wow, okay, for the public to see it. And it was almost canceled. So anyway, that was another benefit of that program in addition to letting the astronauts get the feel of landing an unpowered vehicle.
So did you have a chance to actually work with astronauts at some points during your career?
I work with them hand in hand and live next door to them. And it was a very, very unique experience. And you saw where the Johnson Space Center was. You were there. But the thing that was unique about it, like I said, I joined NASA in 1963 when there was nothing in the Clear Lake area. There was nothing down there but cow pastures. So we started building the Johnson Space Center. So it was an area about, let's say 40 miles south of Houston, out in the nothing, okay? So we were all living, our families, all of our colleagues and everybody were all in this community. So we had this challenge from President Kennedy, said, put a man on the moon, bring him safely back to Earth. Well, we had a big job to do. So here we were out in a remote area. So we were working together and grew up together. We knew each other really, really well. And so I don't think that'll ever be repeated in human history, okay? Where a group of people like that come together, remote operations, and have to learn to live together, okay? Yeah, they probably did that on the atomic bomb development, but they couldn't talk about it. So, and they weren't in the public eye. So, and we were. So it it was a great experience. Won't be repeated in human history. I don't believe it.
So, and you have not yet written a book about all of your experiences?
No.
You saw it all?
No, I do podcasts instead.
But it's pretty unique for someone to have seen all of it. I mean,
well, there have been a lot of books written on the subject. And so I just never thought that I would had a story that was that interesting. So maybe it would be interesting, but I didn't think it was that interesting. So
is there any important thing that people like us from the outside that we think about NASA that's not true, or, any big misconceptions the public has that you could dispel as an insider?
Well, I don't know of any misconceptions. I think NASA, talking about transparent, NASA has always been extremely transparent. NASA has 8 major centers around the nation, and each one of those centers has its own culture. There's the Johnson Space Center in Marshall Space Flight Center, the Kennedy Space Center, the John Glenn Space Center in Ohio, et cetera, and Langley Research Center, Virginia. So they each have their own culture, which was established usually by the person who led it in very early program. I mean, in the early phases of that center. So that's interesting. But at the top, it's at the beginning, NASA was never a political organization. It's become more so that way. I use the analogy that in major programs like the Apollo program, it was a very, very complex program, technically, really complex. We didn't know what we didn't know is about what it amounted to. And there was a lot of technology to develop. Everything you think about the launch system, propulsion systems, environmental control, communication system, none of that existed. So we had to develop it, had to miniaturize it to get it on the spacecraft. But it was very, very easy politically. Okay. Complex technically, easy politically, because everybody wanted to do it. We had to beat the Russians. Okay. They were there ahead of us with their Sputnik in 1957. Then as you fast forward to the space station program, technically not complicated at all. Okay. Yeah. You got to do a lot of logistics of getting big parts into space. Technically it was a simple, but politically, it was complex as hell, okay? So I said there must be a conservation of complexity where you combine the two things, technical and political, and there must be a constant. So anyway, my analogy.
So
I think it works.
When you look back at what you guys got done in the 1960s, is your mind blown that you were able to do that using 1960s technology compared to what we have?
I guess just if you look back, I wouldn't say mind blown, but we just had the attitude that every problem had a solution and we could do it. And we had that confidence in ourselves. And we were young. I mean, I was 20 something. The average age in the entire program was like 35 when we put a person on the moon. When I became the director of the space station program, I was not even 50 years old. So, and in Washington, D.C., dealing with the White House and Congress. But we always had that attitude that we could do it. Okay. But we would, to my knowledge, we never compromised safety. There were some errors made throughout the program. It's, when you put a person on a rocket, it's like a controlled explosion. That's all it is. It's a controlled explosion. So you hope your controls are really good.
Do you have any comparison about the total computing power you had back then versus what we have in one iPhone right now? Anything like that? Oh
my gosh. Oh, golly. I wish I could give you an accurate of that, but probably, I mean, the iPhone that I've got right here has many, many, many times the computing power that the Apollo spacecraft had. I mean, there's no comparison. I mean, this phone's probably, I hate to give you a multiple on that, but it's many, many times greater than the thing in the Apollo spacecraft.
Okay.
In all their systems.
So people have this idea that what NASA was doing was rocket science. And do you have a definition? Was it just a little part of what you were doing? Would you call that little part rocket science, or how do you define it?
I think rocket science is, there are many technologies involved in any space system, from propulsion system to environmental control to the humans, okay, that are there, which we don't do a lot of development on. Yeah, well, I guess we do psychologically. But there's so many details in every one of those systems, environmental control, mechanical system, materials, that you have to perfect. And there's always such detailed problems in every one of them. And if we get a chance, I can talk to you a little bit about the Shuttle thermal protection system and how we came about and how we developed it. And the thing that was the thing that caused the program to slip. It was a long pole in the tip. Was a little bitty simple thing, okay? But it had to be. And so that kind of problems and challenges exist, a million times in a program like that.
Yeah, if you want to talk about the thermal part of it right now.
The shuttle is an interesting thing. It's the orbiter is the airplane. It sits on the back of the rocket being launched, okay? 7.5 million pounds of force that pushes it into space. The orbiter itself is equivalent to the size of a 737. That's what size the orbiter is. It's an aluminum airframe, so it means all that aluminum has to be protected to 350 degrees or less. When it comes back into the atmosphere as a spacecraft, it's 3,000 degrees on the outside. So you got to go from 3,000 degrees outside temperature on the skin to the structure being 350 degrees or less. Well, you have to protect that with something that's totally reusable, extremely lightweight. So here's an example. I don't know how well you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a tile. On the orbiter, there are 25,000 of these tiles bonded to the aluminum structure. The material itself is the density of balsa wood. It's a fibrous silica. It's just put pure sand in a blender, literally, and make fibers out of it. That's what the part is here. So this is 3,000 degrees out here. This is 350 degrees, and you have to attach it to the orbiter. So on the outside is it's a few thousandths of an inch glass. That black stuff you see there is just pure glass, okay? And so the glass coating, when it re-enters, the shuttle is coming back in the atmosphere, it's heating up. It radiates that energy back to space, okay? And the thickness of the tile is determined by how long it takes that 3,000 degrees to get down to 350 degrees. So in parts of the vehicle, it's not 3,000, it's, several hundred degrees. So that determines the thickness of the tiles. So we said, okay, we got that. We developed that material, and lo and behold, we're good to go. So the problem is aluminum expands and contracts a lot. That tile doesn't change shape at all or size when it elevates in temperature. So we said, okay, we'll put an isolation pad between the tile and the orbiter, and we'll just put adhesive on there and glue the two things together. It works, okay? Put in the thermal vacuum chamber and all that kind of stuff. Everything worked really well until we realized that little isolation pad has some little stiff spots in it. And when the tile tended to come away from the vehicle, be pulled away, those little stiff spots were stress concentration, if you will. They were the stiff point. That tile has got a strength of 8 pounds per square inch. So don't forget, lose any one to 25,000 and you lose the vehicle. So all of a sudden we found those tiles were not adequately attached to the orbiter. So we had a bunch of them already bonded. I had to pull them all off and figure out how to strengthen the tile without adding any weight. So there's an engineer over a weekend, a guy named Glenn Ecord, came up with a way on the bottom of the tile, which was just porous material, okay? He took pure silica powder, just sand, finely ground, put it in water with a brush, and he put it on the back of the tile, and it packed itself in the tile. And that adhered, and that doubled the strength of the tile at that interface. So the lesson learned in a lot of things in space and other technologies, necessities the mother of invention. So we had our back against the wall. If we'd have found that problem earlier, we'd added some kind of titanium plate or something like that to the back of it, and we'd have had so much weight on the vehicle, it would have lost a lot of its capability to carry heavy objects into space. So, little story.
Yeah.
There are thousands such stories.
Were you involved at all in the Lost Moon incident there, immortalized in the movie, where you had to figure out how to get them back from space?
Well, that was Apollo 13.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the one where the spacecraft was on the way to the moon and the oxygen tank exploded. Okay. Yes, I was. The simple answer is yes. As a matter of fact, one of the astronauts on board this, a person named Fred Hayes, and I just talked to him yesterday. So, yeah.
But in the movie, it was depicted as it was super time critical that people had to rush to try to figure out how to get them back. And
well, yeah, there was the onboard life support system in the Apollo spacecraft and the lunar module were such that they could only do their part of the mission. Well, when that oxygen tank blew up, there was a limited supply of everything, okay? Power on the spacecraft and everything else. So it was a touch and go all the way, re-engineering how to utilize all the expendables that you had to keep the spacecraft alive, you had to keep the astronauts alive. So there was a lot of innovative developments on board that was developed that was not intended to be, that we had to use what we had, and it worked. It was a time when the whole world came together. That's the neat thing about space programs, the first lunar landing, Apollo 13, and that. And when the humans on Earth have a common problem, they tend to come together. So that was one instant where humans on Earth came together as a group to help to bring those guys back to Earth. So hopefully that'll continue that way. We're find a mutual thing that we all need to accomplish. That's the thing about space, you know. Right now on the space station, there are 13 countries involved in that. And the thing is, you work with Mother Nature's laws, okay? You don't get to modify those. You don't get to amend them. You don't get to vote on them. They're what they are. So you don't screw around Mother Nature. So when you're there, you work under the umbrella of Mother Nature laws and all these other international laws and international agreements. They don't come into play. Yeah, you might say how much space you have or how much power you have or what, something like that. But otherwise, to survive, you better obey Mother Nature's laws.
Yeah, so that's one reason why I have such a deep respect for what you and your team did, because you had to make it work in real life, right? I'm trying to talk about the difference between what you did and what modern alarmist climate science is, where that's hypothetical, but your stuff had to match reality.
I do have a comment on that, and that is, you know, every one of the programs from Project Mercury to the space station program, as I said, you can't argue with Mother Nature's laws. And so you have to adhere to them. And if you had a theory on how hot the shuttle is going to be during reentry, okay, you had to be correct, okay? And you had to have an analysis and scientific programs and demonstrations. You had to prove what you thought was right. When I said that, you know, the aluminum couldn't get above 350 degrees on the orbiter, we tested that. We said, we think that that's right, that that's what that temperature is going to be. But we didn't accept our analysis without proof of the analysis. So we verified as best we could everything that we predicted, that we analyzed, and we said, this is what the results of our analytical study show. That's not true. I'm going to be very blunt. That's not true with climate change. There are predictions. It's the climate on the Earth, in the atmosphere, and the heat transfer from the sun to the Earth and the storage of the heat on the Earth is really complex. And people can build their math models, their analysis, all they want. But until you prove with actual data that that's correct, then you may be off. So one of the things that when I got involved in climate change, it was called global warming, okay, at that time. And I was in Washington, D.C., and I asked the chief scientist at NASA, I said, explain this global warming thing to me. This was, you know, like in the late 80s. And he said, well, let me show you something, Tom. Let's look at some real data. So he showed me some examples of ice cores taken out of the Arctic. In the Arctic, every single year, Arctic and Antarctic, it captures the atmosphere and freezes it. And it freezes it layer on layer on layer on layer. So you know how much oxygen there was, how much carbon dioxide there was. you can estimate what the temperature was based on some of these variables. He said the Earth's temperature has been changing for hundreds of thousands of years, okay? He said, there is no global warming produced by man. So I said, aha. I said, then, I was looking at real data. So with that, I got interested in it. It didn't do a lot till I, number of 10 years or so later, and longer than that. And I met a man named Leighton Stewart who had written a book, Fire, Ice, and Paradise. And all he did in his book was look at empirical data and said that, if you look at that, you come to the same conclusion that the Earth's temperature has been changing for hundreds of millions of years. The oxygen content has been changing. The temperature has been changing widely, okay, over that period of time. I had Leighton speak to a group of retired NASA people at my home. As a matter of fact, there were probably 30 or 40 of us there. And so I challenged this group to look at the real, honest-to-God data and facts on climate change. So that began in 2011, and that was called the Right Climate Stuff. So all that group of scientists do, engineers and scientists, they look at data and have over this entire period and are absolutely 100% convinced that human-produced carbon dioxide is not the cause of climate change. It's the sun, okay? Yeah, there's some greenhouse gases, but it has an insignificant effect on the temperature of the Earth. So that's kind of coupling the two things together just from the standpoint of, in NASA, you have to obey Mother Nature's laws. In climate change, you have to obey Mother Nature's laws and look at real data, because math models and analysis can be wrong. And if you have an analysis, then prove it. That's how I couple the two things.
And I have a copy of that letter from 2012, the Right Climate Stuff letter, signed by 49 people, I think, some astronauts, NASA.
That's correct. That's correct.
And it's strongly worded. It says it is, quote, it is clear that the science is not settled, end quote. I think that's great stuff. There were moonwalkers, right? People who walked on the moon signed that, including Harrison Schmitt, right?
That's correct. That's correct. He was the second to last man on the moon, and he's still living.
Yeah.
And Gene Cernan passed away not too long ago, so he was the last guy to walk on the moon. But yeah, and there's a perfect example. Harrison, or we call him Jack Schmitt, okay? PhD geologist, okay? Scientist, okay? Smart guy, astronaut, U.S. Senator from New Mexico. He truly believes, to this day, believes human-produced carbon dioxide is not causing climate change. He signed that letter along with 5 other astronauts. As a matter of fact, I wrote that letter, and Walt Cunningham and I wrote it together, really. He edited it, and so Walt was astronaut on Apollo 10, I think, was Walt Cunningham's. And Walt Cunningham just died a few months ago. But we said that the purpose being, the NASA administrator was a friend of all of ours. He was a former astronaut, retired astronaut. Charlie Bolden was his name. And we thought that NASA, I told you a while ago that in early days, NASA was not politicized, okay? Yeah, you had to play politics with where money was coming from and so forth. But it has become very politicized. And there was a person there in NASA that was claiming all this stuff about humans causing it. And as a matter of fact, that guy was working directly with Al Gore to produce some of his things. And it put the NASA image on there. And we thought that was inappropriate. So I wrote the letter that you've read and said, knock it off. NASA, be honest with the people. You're discrediting the whole agency by doing that. Well, because the NASA administrator is appointed by the president. He was reporting to his boss, who was the president of the United States, who was Barack Obama, I think, at the time. So we didn't like it. We thought it was dishonest.
So out of the people that you worked with, I'm curious if there's any percentage. Did you work with a certain percentage of people who did believe that we're experiencing a climate crisis and CO2 is the climate control now?
We never told anybody like that. But what we had is the Right Climate Stuff had some forums where we said, look, let's all get together, both sides, and discuss this. And maybe we're wrong, If we are, let's let's look at the data and see if we can't figure it out. Hell, several of those, and there was never anything that could dispute looking at the empirical data. So I don't know what the percentage today, I think it's become so politicized in climate change now, people close their mind. And probably there are people at NASA that have closed minds to that. I know I have good friends. They're smart, and they will not accept it, and they won't listen to the facts either, or won't listen to the arguments. So,
do you have any sense that there's any sort of a split between what I would call real NASA that are doing the real work and maybe NASA GIS or the Gavin Schmitt NASA?
No, I don't have an opinion on that. You've heard Alex Epstein speak there at the conference where you and I attended. His book is Fossil Futures. And the thing that's interesting about that is it looks at the whole issue of climate change and fossil fuels and available, affordable energy from a humanistic standpoint. He's a philosopher, seemed like a smart young man, but he looks at it, how important it is to have that type of resource of energy available around the world. And so this, I'm going to call it artificially saying we need to get rid of carbon dioxide or reduce it or net zero is going to could be a huge impact on the lifestyle of people all over the world and even the survivability of people around the world. So it's important. And so that's the reason I'm still staying attuned and to help spread the word of climate change truth as much as I can. I talk to Gratis, I don't charge anything to talk, but I talked to, 1,500 people or so here in recently. And to a person, okay, I've never had anybody out of the audience challenge what I say on humans or not. Human-produced carbon dioxide is not causing climate change. And I present, an hour-long presentation on why that's true. And no one has ever countered it. Most people will come up after the talk and say, thank you. I've always felt that, but now I know why. So it's important. That's what I'm trying to do, is help get that word out to the citizenry and essentially let them see the facts and draw their own conclusion. Because it's extremely, extremely important. And will be in the next presidential election in the United States.
I watched a couple of your talks in preparation for this. And one thing you said is that it would be great if skeptics had a national spokesperson, maybe a younger spokesperson. Do you have any more additional thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, my additional thoughts is I haven't come up with that person, who that could be, Mm-hmm. I have some thoughts, and maybe the right, like we talked about a while ago, Jack Schmitt. If the person's got to be credible, or at least they've got to present the facts in such a way that they're credible. He would be extremely credible, okay? PhD, astronaut, senator, et cetera, well-spoken. He'd be a good spokesman, but he's just an old white man. Now, when you're trying to reach young people, I don't know if that's the right kind of person to do that, or maybe there's not a person that can do it. Maybe you take each subject that is really the Earth's temperature is controlled by the sun, and you present those facts, and maybe one person does that and somebody else does another. I don't know, but I've got some other ideas that I'm still working on. Or maybe it's an animated thing like Geico with their little lizard, okay? An animated object like it, or image of an animal or whatever can be the spokesman. But to me, that's what we need. But that's not my wheelhouse, so I can think like that. But I did help sell the idea to the Congress of we needed a space station, and I was told it wasn't going to work, but it worked. So we won over the Reagan White House and the Congress to approve it. So maybe I can sell a thing or two.
Some other people on my podcast have suggested, and I do agree, that as time goes on and the climate apocalypse never happens, that this hysteria may just die off on its own because the weather is not cooperating. All the horrible stuff that was supposed to happen is not happening, and eventually people are going to move on to something else.
Correct. Yeah, correct. I think one of the real pieces of data that shows that too is over the last industrial age, the last almost 200 years, okay, carbon dioxide is doubled in the atmosphere. Temperature has gone up 1 degree centigrade. Well, if you look at some of the extremes of temperature over hundreds of thousands of years, that's varied by 10 degrees, okay? I mean, temperature on Earth is varied over a large great amount. And I think also there's evidence that when the Earth temperature increased by that 1 degree and so forth, and carbon dioxide has increased, the Earth has gotten greener. The icebergs have come and gone, okay, the ice, the glaciers and all. I think real data is beginning to show, in the claim keeps changing too. You know, it's gone from global warming to climate change to et cetera, fitting the narrative as best it can. To me, I'll just be very blunt. It's all about control. What's common around the entire Earth? The atmosphere. So if you can control that, you know, you can control a lot of existence of human beings.
Throughout your work, have you looked into at all climate change on other planets? What's happening on Mars, for example, that might be paralleling what's happening here?
I personally have not, and I don't think the right climate stuff has. I think that's, again, this is a bunch of there are a few climatologists in this group and meteorologists and all, but a lot of them are just, you know, mechanical, electrical engineers, environmental engineers that know how to look at scientific data and facts and come from that. And that's my background. My education is I'm a mechanical engineer. So, but the answer is not to my knowledge. I haven't done that. I think people have.
Are you looking for funding at all, or is there a way to donate to the right climate stuff?
Well, you know, I think when we talk about trying to educate the people on climate change, what it amounts to is it's a campaign. You know, I can talk to a group of 100 people or so, but that's not going to educate enough people to make a informed decision on this subject and how to vote. And to me, it's going to take a campaign to do it, and it's probably going to be a campaign that's going to cost $50 million. The way I come up with that is you need to have a short message 5 or 6 times a day for 20 or 30 seconds nationally for 6 days a week, and do that between now and 2024 when the next U.S. presidential election is. And if you do that, just back of the envelope, that costs about $50 million to do that on a couple of networks. So I may be off by a large amount either way on that. That's, again, outside my wheelhouse. That shows all the programs that looks at, you know, human spaceflight programs that follows this principle, you know, verify what you think your analysis says. Every single one of those and follows Mother Nature's laws. I think a very important slide is this one here. This shows over 600 million years, you know, the temperature in the blue line and how it varies over plus or minus, you know, over 10 degrees from 12 degrees C at that one point down to 22 degrees centigrade. It varies over like 150 million year cycles, okay? Temperatures vary. And then the black line shows what carbon dioxide has been. You know, it shows based on empirical data and from geological data. At one time, the atmosphere had 7,000 parts per million. Here we are today at 420 or 450 parts per million. So, you know, even if it wasn't 7,000, say it was 2,000, we're still 5 times greater than we were back at the peak. Carbon dioxide is not causing the climate change. That's probably the most important slide that I use. Another one that I think is important. I look at this thing. As I said, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I don't get wrapped up into how much energy is in the water and how much is in the clouds and all that kind of stuff. I look at, there's 2 bodies in our universe. It's important. The sun and the earth. And the earth is this little blue marble. And where does it get its energy from? Only one place, from the sun. So it absorbs it and it radiates it out to space, just like the shuttle does when it comes back in. It radiates all that heat back to space as it re-enters. The earth is radiating heat out. Yeah, the atmosphere kind of keeps part of it in toward the earth a little bit, but not a significant amount. So when you try to get into the weeds of the radiation characteristics of various gases and all that kind of stuff, sorry, I tend to ignore all that stuff. I look at it in a global point. And this slide just shows how the energy comes in from the sun, heats up the earth, it radiates back to space, and there's a lot of interchange.
So, Tom, do you have any thoughts on volcanic heat varying?
You know, what I need to have, and I don't have it in my fingertips, is what is the percentage of the Earth's temperature that's generated from internal things like volcanic operation. I need to get that, but it's insignificant. It's insignificant. But I will get that. If I get it, I'll share that with you. And so here's another thing that I think helps explain why the Earth's temperature varies too. The Earth is going around the sun in an elliptical orbit. Sometimes it's further away from the sun than it is at other times. So proximity to the sun is causing the heat to change. Also, that orbit is tilting. It's becoming oblique, and the Earth gets heat from the sun only by radiation, period. No conductivity or anything else. So radiation energy is a function of the radiation source to the surface that's being heated. And if it's dead on to it 90 degrees, that's the maximum. If it tilts, then it's less. Well, that ellipse is tilting, so the amount of energy to the Earth is tilting. In the meantime, the Earth is spinning, so parts of it's heating, part of it's cooling, and the axis is wobbling. So all those things, if you look at that other chart that shows how it varies over a period of time, that helps explain it. When you look at what's predicted by models that haven't been verified as compared to the temperature as measured on the Earth, and especially this one is one showing the ocean temperature. Ocean temperature is going up and down, but it's not increasing, whereas climate models show it's going really quickly increasing. As a matter of fact, Al Gore at Davos said there's enough energy being captured on the Earth every day, equivalent to 600,000 atomic bombs every day. And the Earth and the waters are boiling. Sorry, Al, water's not boiling. There's the temperatures measured from 3,000 buoys, and it's not changing at all. To me, those are the kinds of important things. And when you look at the claim that extreme weathers are caused by climate change, from hurricanes to tornadoes to floods to droughts to wildfire, when you look at the data from each one of those extreme weather events, they are not changing. They're not increasing. As a matter of fact, some of them are decreasing. If the data shows that, then that's going to be it. So humans are not causing that at all. So I think a good example of that is also when you look at what's happened to increase carbon dioxide on plants and what demonstrated evidence. So double the carbon dioxide on plants, and they produce about, some of them 70% more foliage than others. But when you look at all the food crops and everything, it's about 40% increase if you just keep everything constant but double carbon dioxide. So it could be, helping the breadbasket of the world to put more carbon dioxide in the air as opposed to eliminating it. So my bottom line is, why try to eliminate something that's good? The earth warming is good to an extent, okay? Don't overdo it. Carbon dioxide is not going to do it, period. If all the carbon dioxide that could be produced it may go up 1 more degree centigrade, but that's by analysis. So you'd have to monitor and make sure and produce more affordable, available energy for people on Earth to live and survive. People are concerned about carbon dioxide. Well, if you can conclude that increased carbon dioxide is not increasing the temperature of the Earth, and it's good for plants, then what about humans? Well, we breathe in 420 parts per million if we step outside. On a Navy submarine, the sailors there breathe 8,000 parts per million. And they can do that for months at a time. NASA in the space station, the astronauts there breathe 5,000 parts, a factor of more than 12 of what you and I breathe. And they're okay for 3 years in that condition. So, when you look at that, that's insignificant. It's not hurting humans. As a matter of fact, that's good. So my conclusion is there's not a climate crisis. Carbon dioxide is good. I think if I had to use one word to describe it all, that's the one term I would try to use. Carbon dioxide is good. World needs reliable, cost-effective energy, and we're just not doing a good job of delivering it. So that's a problem. So who's doing this? In my opinion, it's the people that want one world society. That means they want control over as many people on Earth as possible. From the United States perspective, foreign countries would like to have financial aid to reduce carbon dioxide. There's billions that can be made on Wall Street by net zero carbon dioxide. If an oil company is producing oil, but putting carbon dioxide back in the earth, and they can show they're putting more carbon dioxide back in the earth than they're producing, then that's net zero, and they can do that, and it'll cost them, or they can find a broker to help them do that for billions of dollars. A lot of people profit off of green energy, the windmills and solar cells. There are a lot of people, and I'll sorry to say this, but I think NASA's one of them. I think they're funded by people that want to show that the carbon dioxide is bad. So there's a lot of universities, including the University I went to, the University of Texas. A lot of the students and the professors believe that because that's what they're asked to prove. In the environmental group, there's some people just are closed-minded and it's a religion to them, so you can't change that. And then the public likes to do it because it's catastrophic stories still media. So to me, those are the types of people that want to claim that the climate change is bad. So where do we go with this campaign? You know, the alarmists have more money. They have the big microphones. Biden was speaking yesterday on national television about climate change and how people 18 to 35 are going to die because of climate change. He's wrong. He's just uninformed, or I'll just be nice and say uninformed. But we have the truth, and so that's what we got to base our campaign on, is the truth. And if we're wrong, show us we're wrong.
Any other points you'd like to make before we go ahead and wrap up?
I think it probably covers it all. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope that people can get educated on the fact that carbon dioxide is good. I'll just end it with that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next time.
Okay, good deal, Tom.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Tom Moser. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.